Hi, Janky Stief here, the long-haired freaky dude. Today we're reviewing the essential piece of American literature, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Why essential? Well, only because it started a war which forever shaped the history of America and the world. That's all. It is arguably that the abolitionist views in this very book set forth a chain of events which caused the Civil War and ultimately the emancipation of slaves. Many historians and even Abraham Lincoln himself accredited Harriet Beecher Stowe to causing the Civil War. Uncle Tom's Cabin tells the tumultuous tale of life as slaves in 1850s United States of America. It exposes the pain that these poor men, women, and children had to endure, whether from separation of family, direct brute physical force, or through hampering of liberties. But it is so much more than that. In fact, these exposures are far, far from the focus of this novel. I expected 460 pages of whipping, torture, and pain, but that was not so. In fact, for a third of the book, things actually went pretty well as far as life as a slave was in the 1850s. I was thrown off. How could such a good fortune tale invigorate the North to the point of fighting? Surely this is what most of us in the modern day think. Brute stories are a great way to make us angry at the South in today's world, but not back then. To understand this book, one must put themselves in the shoes of a man from the 1850s, and only then will this book make sense. Only then can we understand the true purpose of this book. Today, we're angered by brutal tales, for we see them as cruelties to men. In the 1850s, however, they were seen merely as cruelties to animals. And I think Harriet Beecher Stowe brilliantly and thankfully realized this fact. And that to save the slaves, she would first need to humanize them. People are much more willing to fight for a cause when they see it as a cause for humanity, for other humans, not merely things as they were treated. And that's what a bulk of this novel is. Not demoralizing the slave owners, but personifying the slaves. And naturally, the brute stories, which everyone already knew of and didn't need retold to them through a novel, would become all the more horrific. With that said, there are actually plenty of kind-hearted slave owners in here. In fact, very, very nice, likable men. Not your stereotypical slaveholder. And I warn you that it will definitely throw you off. For it seems that doing such contradicts her goal. But as history shows, it's exactly what people needed to see. Not a slave owner vilified, but an animal humanized. The narration of this novel is, at times, a bit of a drag. I had to resort to my dictionary quite a few times while reading this, and I can assure you that after reading this, my vocabulary has been expanded by at least 50 words. Perhaps more than when I concluded Catch-22, and that was a lot. Seeing that this book was essentially not written to be a pleasuring read, but for the sake of abolitionist activism, she occasionally breaks the scene quite frequently to address the reader in second-person rants against the atrocities which are slavery. These do get monotonous, but then again for me it's like she's preaching to the choir. Oddly enough, there's actually some tangents she goes off on the state of black people, which I thought were crudely offensive. Even though she's trying to humanize them, she still seems to treat them as inferiors, degrading imbeciles rather than equals. Had these passages been taken out of context and their author remained anonymous, I would have just assumed that they were the words of some Southern slaveholder. But trying to consider who her audience is, I assume she might have been trying to assimilate and sympathize with her audience, who also thought of them as inferior, for the offensive rants occur primarily in the beginning of the book. As she humanizes them more and more, and I'm guessing as she hoped her audience seen them as more humanized, her inferior rants became almost null by the end of the book. In fact, there are some cases where the fates of her slave characters become more superior, at least in terms of education and wealth, than their former masters. However, some racist stereotypes do persist. Nevertheless, I think they were very important to include. Consider this. Uncle Tom's Cabin became one of the best-selling novels of the time, not just in America, but across the whole world. And had these stereotypes not been included, which everyone was familiar with, would it have been nearly as successful? I think not. Because humans like stereotypes, we connect with stereotypes. They were necessary. So you could chew her up for that all that you want, but just keep in mind that had these stereotypes not been impressed, it might have taken a lot longer for slavery to end. Put your mind in her time, not ours. So I presume that these were included by intelligent design, and not because her genuine feelings of inferiority. Nonetheless, I couldn't help but picture Miss Ophelia as Stowe's novelic impression of herself. I absolutely love the dialogue in here. It's incredibly realistic, and for a book of that time, it's rather impressive. I didn't think this realistic style of dialogue had emerged until Mark Twain, so that was a pleasant surprise. Stowe puts an incredible amount of literary energy into constructing realistic speeches, which mimic the anerisms and the accents of its speakers. A lot of people today contribute this very thing to a racist stereotype. But I mean, bloody hell, if the character is a slave who's never been educated, doesn't know how to read or write, do you think they're gonna be speaking Shakespearean sonnet? No, their speech is gonna naturally be broken and less intelligent. It's not racist, it's real. Good Lord, people. And to prove that it's not racism in here, there are some slaves who are educated, and they speak just as good as the white characters in this book. It's not racist. That's just one thing which I hate. I don't hate anything more than people who confuse racism with facts. I mean, someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, look, a white guy." It's some people say it's racist, but it's fact, I'm white. This wouldn't have any influence whatsoever if this stuff wasn't in here. None at all. Anyways, one must also keep in mind the importance, or rather the influence of religion on people during this time, especially among the slaves. And one must definitely keep this in mind, for the latter half of this book is deeply embedded in seeing how religion affects slaves and slave owners. And surely since the Northerners during this time were deeply religious people, it was important to include these religious scenes in the book. I thought the ending, not the ending, but the ending was rather peculiar. Not at all what I expected. I do realize that it's actually what people thought of as the preferred outcome for slaves. These views were held by most Northerners and, from what I understand, even Lincoln himself. But after slaves were actually emancipated, very few succumbed to the fate which is described in the end of this book. The fate which Northerners had hoped upon them. They wanted to free the blacks, but God forbid they had to live with them. Nonetheless, showing this preferable fate was essential to gaining their fighting hearts. So, definitely not what I expected, but I liked it. If not for the story, then definitely for its historical significance. I implore you to read this book, especially if you are an American, for this is a book we should all be thankful for and should pay homage to by reading at least once in our lives. If you think it's a racist book, then I insist that your reason for thinking so is because you failed to put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you think it's racist, then perhaps you should stick with reading sanitized modern literature, okay? Don't listen to the modern criticisms of this book. Think for yourself. Consider all the anti-racist things this book has accomplished and make your own judgments. So my questions to you are, in what ways does humanizing the protagonist rather than vilifying the antagonist affect the outcome of the novel? And what other novels have you read that have done this? How do you think Harriet Beecher Stowe's construction of her character's plot and setting affected her intended audience? How much do you think this actually played a role in starting the Civil War? Well, I'm Stief, the long-haired freaky dude. Thank you for watching this book review. If you liked the video, be sure to hit that awesome thumbs up button down below. And if you want to see more great videos such as book reviews, cooking tutorials, or headbanging to classical music, then might I suggest checking out my channel and hitting the subscribe button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns and want to continue the discussion of this book, please be sure to do so in the comment section below. However vulgar, down there anything goes.
There's no sanitization down there, people. We don't want you to be offended.
offend it now, do we? God forbid we hurt your feelings. People, they are like the balls. It's like somebody cut them off and threw them away. I'm the long-haired freaky dude. I hope you enjoyed. See y'all in the next video.